Thousands of federal jobs have been cut recently, but it's just not government workers anymore. We're looking at billions of dollars in contracts. This can reduce high-paying contracting jobs. Will it affect you? Let's get into it. The top 10 consulting firms, they receive about $65 billion of taxpayer money. This includes companies like Deloitte, Accenture, Booz Allen. Now they're all on the chopping block. The government is saying get rid of non-essential contracts, save money, and shake things up a little bit. Now the money that they get, the billions of dollars, this is all coming from the taxpayers. So how do they get this money? It usually starts with lobbying congressional representatives. You're trying to get authorization for an agency to start a project. Now, Congress can't give a contract directly to a company, but what they can do is they can allocate money within an agency, let's say the VA. The VA, Office of Information Technology, you can allocate money for a project. And then when companies are bidding on that project, well, we all know which one's going to come up on top. Whatever the leader is in that space. Might be Deloitte. Maybe it's Booz Allen Hamilton. Last year, Booz Allen Hamilton gave $1.2 million in contributions. This money is coming from their PAC, the Political Action Committee. It's not coming directly from them. Because if it were coming from the corporation, well, that would be largely illegal. We wouldn't want that. But if it comes from a PAC, that's okay. Now, who gives money to the PAC? Employees, shareholders, and executives. So it's directly affiliated with the company, but it's not the company. And for the most part, the money is going equally to Republicans and Democrats. Interestingly, when you look at Booz Allen Hamilton, over half of the lobbyists, the people lobbying Congress, over half of them used to be federal employees. But 1.2 million, really that's small potatoes. Let's look at one of the big dogs. This is Boeing, and they gave close to $10 million in lobbying last year. This influences the defense budget. This makes sure that Boeing continues to get preferable treatment when it comes to contracts. Because if it didn't buy you influence, why would you throw away $10 million? There's so many other places you can spend $10 million. Why are you donating it to political campaigns? On February 26th, the head of the GSA sent a memo that got federal agencies scrambling. It's a direct order. Terminate contracts with the top 10 highest paid consulting firms. The memo says enough is enough. And it's supporting the Trump administration in reducing what they're calling waste, spending, and increasing the efficiency. Agencies have until March 7th to comply. That's not too many days from now. They have to list every contract with one of these top 10 companies and provide justification. If they want to keep it, they have to have a senior official sign off on it. Otherwise, it's at risk of being cut. But this isn't the first warning. Previously, GSA told agencies to review their contracts and get rid of the non-essential ones. They're just saying it again here. Now, $65 billion goes to the top 10, but that's not even 10%. Because if you look at how much the government spends on contracting in general, that number is over $700 billion. Do you understand how much money that is? $700 billion. If you were to divide that up with every American adult, that would be like $2,600 per American adult. That's the check that would go out. That's what makes up $700 billion a year. And some contracts are essential. Look at cybersecurity with Microsoft and Palantir. Yeah, those might be essential, but not all of them are. So which ones could be impacted? There are a lot of consulting titans with decades-long love affairs with the government. Take Deloitte, over $450 million last year alone. Accenture Federal Services grabbed a $1.6 billion deal last year. Booz Allen Hamilton has been a Pentagon darling since the Cold War, raking in billions of dollars for cybersecurity and intel work. These companies have been the government's go-to fixers ever since the 1980s. When did this all start? Well, it started under President Ronald Reagan, and for a few reasons. Number one, he dramatically expanded DoD and the contracting support that exists for DoD because of the Cold War, because of the Soviet Union. So that's one thing. Another one is he wanted a smaller government. So he did cut the federal workforce, but it left a void. Just like when President Bill Clinton cut 400,000 from the federal workforce, it left a void. There's a hole, there's a gap. So what are you putting in there to fill that gap? Well, you get some contractors and you throw it in the void. You fill the hole with the contractors because it's the private sector. The private sector is efficient. The private sector is more effective. They're faster. You can fire them quickly. You don't have to give them the same benefits. You don't give them a pension and they'll still work hard for you. So smaller government is another reason. And then the deregulation that occurred under Ronald Reagan, it incentivized companies to start bidding and competing for government contracts. So if the government actually decides to cut billions of dollars in contracts, how many jobs would be lost? Contracting jobs. Let's do a thought experiment. $65 billion, right? How much does it cost to have an employee, a contractor? If they're earning about $150,000 a year, which is probably average in the DC area, $150K, that employee would be the equivalent of $400,000 in revenue. So let's divide 65 billion by 400,000. This is going to be a very rough estimation, but let's say it's around 150, 160,000 jobs that could be lost. The reason why that the contracting employee is only making 150 from the 400K is because the industry standard is about 30 to 40%, maybe 50% of the revenue the company gets for that employee, because they have to do research and development costs. They have to have a profit, right? These are for-profit companies. That's what makes them so efficient. So they have to have a profit. But this wouldn't just hit the contractor. This would hit subcontractors and small businesses that rely on federal dollars being spent. And right now, there are over 4 million contractors in this country. And we know that the federal workforce is 2 million. So you see how the government can be so much larger than what you anticipated? You look at 2 million, these 2 million right now are being vilified. They're like, oh, this is the worst thing ever. They're so inefficient. They're lazy. They're staying at home. They have multiple jobs. These 2 million, let's get rid of all of them. But right behind those 2 million, you have 4 million that are supporting the 2 million. So you got a 6 million person organization here. But a lot of the emotions and the hate, they go towards the public sector, not the private sector. Private sector is pretty much in the shadow in a corner at this particular point. No one's really slinging mud at the private sector or the defense contractors. But this whole thing, if they do end up cutting contracts, and I think if your mission is efficiency, if you're trying to reduce waste and abuse and fraud, absolutely, cut some contracts, cut some multi-billion-dollar contracts and save some money that way. This wouldn't just affect people in the DC area. You have contractors in Texas, in Florida, in California, all over the country, really. And maybe they don't slash all 65 billion, just cut that number in half. What is that? 32 billion, 32.5 billion? That would still represent roughly 70,000 contracting jobs lost. And then add that number to however many federal employees you decide to cut at the end of it all. Add all that up, and then you tell me how that's impacting local economies across the country. But another thing to consider is a lot of these contracts, the money's already paid out. So you can go through there and cut the contract, but there's no actual tangible savings. You know, Elon Musk and Doge went through recently and they were cutting all these contracts thinking that they were saving money, but the money was already spent. It was something like 40% of all the contracts that they cut. It represented no actual dollar figure in savings. So what's the end game? By March 7th, agencies like DoD, VA, HUD, they all have to report what's being cut and what's being kept. Now, will we see multi-billion dollars being cut, or is this whole thing all for show and nothing is going to change? We'll have to wait and see. The government heavily depends on contractors. A lot of people would say they overly depend on contractors. When it comes to IT support, infrastructure, logistics, they really leverage their contractor support. Contractors also have lobbying influence. Many of these companies, they have lobbying power. They pretty much influence policy at a certain level. So that could keep them alive for longer. And then there's multi-year agreements. And this is what we were just talking about. Even if you cut the contract, the money's been spent. Now, if you're on the job hunt right now, you could be looking at the federal workforce. You're like, I don't want to go over there. The political winds, They seem pretty fierce. I don't want to risk it in the federal side. But then you're looking at the contractors and you're like, well, I don't even know if I'm going to have a job over there. Maybe I jump on there and the contract's cut. What am I going to do then? Then you look at the private sector, you see, well, Amazon's having layoffs and Meta announced some layoffs. Where's the safety? Where's the stability? Really, I would say your state, county, and city government. If that's your primary focus, if that's what you value the most is stability and security, you got to look at the lower levels of government. But it really depends on your geographical location because maybe that's not a possibility for you. Maybe the private sector is the best opportunity, and it could be a smaller company, a company that no one's ever heard of, and they could give you a sweet deal. You're going to have to explore that. I think the smaller companies, they get less applicants. A company like Amazon or Meta or Google, they're going to have thousands of people apply. But if you go look at, Russell Brown Incorporated down the street, whatever that is, if you apply for them, you're probably dealing with a lot less applicants. With the recent federal employee probationary purge that took place, you saw over 20,000 people lose their jobs. And now there's a federal judge saying, this whole thing is illegal. Stop everything. If you want to know more about that, check this video out next. If you need a federal resume, check out the links down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.